Eleanor Hayes stood at the train station in Boston with shaking hands. She held a small bag with all her belongings inside. In her other hand, she gripped a photograph of a man she had never met. The picture showed a tall cowboy with dark hair and serious eyes. His name was James Cordell. In 3 weeks, she would become his wife. The morning air was cold and damp. Eleanor pulled her thin coat tighter around her body. She was 23 years old and had no other choice. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts. Her uncle had offered to take her in, but only as a servant in his household. His wife made it clear that Eleanor would work for every bite of food and every corner to sleep in. So Eleanor had answered an advertisement in the newspaper. A rancher in Montana Territory needed a wife. He promised a home, protection, and a life together. Eleanor wrote him 3 letters. He wrote back twice. His words were simple and honest. He needed help on his ranch. He was tired of being alone. He would treat her fairly if she worked hard. That was all Eleanor knew about the man she would marry. The train whistle blew loud and sharp. Eleanor jumped. Other passengers pushed past her, eager to board. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. There was no turning back now. Boston held nothing for her anymore. Maybe Montana would be better. Maybe it would be worse. But it would be different, and different was all she had left to hope for. The train ride lasted forever. 3 days to Chicago, then another week to the Western Territories. Eleanor sat by the window and watched the cities fade away. Soon there were only small towns, then just farms, then endless grass and sky. The land looked empty and wild. It scared her. At night she slept sitting up in her seat. The train car smelled of smoke and unwashed bodies. Other passengers stared at her. A young woman traveling alone was strange. Some people whispered. Eleanor kept her eyes down and her hands folded in her lap, just as she had been taught. In a dusty town called Billings, Eleanor left the train and climbed into a stagecoach. 5 other passengers squeezed inside with her. The coach bounced and rattled over rough roads. Dust came in through every crack. Eleanor's back ached. Her head pounded. She tried not to cry. The journey took 3 more days. They stopped at small stations where Eleanor could barely eat the hard bread and tough meat they served. The water tasted strange. At night, she slept in rooms with thin walls and beds that smelled like old sweat. She could hear everything happening in the other rooms. Men shouting, women laughing, sometimes other sounds that made her face turn red. Finally, the stagecoach driver called out her stop. Eleanor climbed down on stiff legs. They had stopped in front of a general store in a town that was barely a town at all. Just a few wooden buildings and a wide dirt street. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and huge. The sky seemed to go on forever. "Someone meeting you, miss?" the driver asked. Eleanor nodded, though her stomach twisted with fear. What if no one came? What if James Cordell had changed his mind? The driver handed down her bag and drove away. Eleanor stood alone in the street. A few people stared at her from the store windows. She felt their eyes like pins pressing into her skin. Then she heard hoofbeats. A man rode up on a large brown horse. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and lines around his eyes. He wore dusty clothes and a hat that shaded his face. When he looked at her, his expression was hard to read. "Eleanor Hayes?" he asked. His voice was low and rough. "Yes," she said quietly. "Mr. Cordell? Call me Flint, everyone does." He looked her up and down like he was examining a horse at market. "You look sturdy enough. Can you cook?" Eleanor blinked. This was not how she had imagined their first meeting. "Yes, I can cook." "Good. Can you ride?" "No, sir." "I mean, no, Flint," he grunted. "You'll learn." He reached down. "Give me your bag." Eleanor handed it up. He tied it behind his saddle, then reached down again. "Come on. It's a long ride to the ranch." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand. "I'm to ride with you? On the horse?" "Unless you want to walk 50 miles, 50 miles. Eleanor's legs already hurt from the journey. She took his hand. His grip was strong and his skin was rough with calluses. He pulled her up behind him with surprising ease. Eleanor had never been this close to a man before. She didn't know where to put her hands. "Hold on to me," Flint said, "and hold tight. This isn't a city buggy ride." Eleanor wrapped her arms around his waist. She could feel the solid muscle of his back through his shirt. Her face burned with embarrassment. The horse started moving and she gripped tighter to keep from falling. They rode in silence. The landscape rolled past them, endless grass and scattered trees. Eleanor saw cattle in the distance, hundreds of them. She saw no houses, no people, just land and sky. The sun beat down on her head.
She had left her bonnet in her bag.
Soon her face would be burned, and her mother's voice echoed in her head about ladies keeping their skin pale and protected. But her mother was dead. Those rules belonged to a different world. After 2 hours of riding, Eleanor's body ached everywhere. Her legs hurt from gripping the horse. Her arms were tired from holding on. Her back felt like it might break. But she didn't complain. She wouldn't give Flint a reason to think she was weak. Finally, buildings appeared in the distance. A house, a barn, some smaller structures. Flint guided the horse toward them. As they got closer, Eleanor's heart sank. This was the ranch. The house was small and plain, made of rough wood. The barn looked sturdier than the house. Everything was surrounded by dust and emptiness. Flint stopped the horse and swung down. He reached up to help Eleanor, but she tried to dismount herself. Her legs were so stiff that she nearly fell. Flint caught her arms and steadied her. "Takes time to get used to riding," he said. Eleanor stepped back as soon as she could stand. She looked at the house that would be her home. It was smaller than the servant quarters in her uncle's house. The windows were covered with oilcloth instead of glass. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. "It's not much," Flint said, watching her face, "but it keeps out the wind and rain." "It's fine," Eleanor lied. Flint grabbed her bag and walked to the house. Eleanor followed. Inside was even worse than outside. One main room served as kitchen and living space. A cast-iron stove sat against one wall. A rough table and 2 chairs filled the center. Shelves held basic supplies. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. "That door leads to the bedroom," Flint said, pointing. "You can have it. I sleep in the bunkhouse with my men." Eleanor turned to look at him. "The bunkhouse? I've got 3 ranch hands. We sleep out there." He set her bag down. "Figured you'd want privacy. Until you're ready," until she was ready. Eleanor understood. He was giving her time. The relief she felt made her dizzy. She had been so afraid of this moment, of what he would expect on their first night. "Thank you," she whispered. Flint nodded. He moved toward the door, then stopped. "There's food in the pantry. Beans, flour, some dried meat. Creeks behind the house for water. I'll come by at sundown for supper." He looked at her again, his dark eyes unreadable. "Welcome to Montana, Eleanor." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the dusty little house that was now her home. Eleanor stood in the silence. She could hear the wind outside, a constant whisper that never seemed to stop. She could hear birds calling, strange birds she didn't recognize. In the distance, cattle lowed. The sounds were so different from Boston's church bells and carriage wheels and street vendors. She walked to the bedroom and pushed open the door. A narrow bed with a thin mattress. A crate turned on its side for a table. A hook on the wall for hanging clothes. That was all. Eleanor sat on the bed and felt the tears finally come. She had traveled so far and given up everything she knew. For this. For a rough cowboy who looked at her like livestock. For a tiny house in the middle of nowhere. But as she cried, Eleanor also felt something else. Something she hadn't expected. A tiny spark of something that might have been relief. Or freedom. Here, there was no uncle watching her every move. No aunt criticizing everything she did. No neighbors judging her father's debts. Here she was just Eleanor. Just a woman starting over. She wiped her eyes and stood up. The room was dusty. The whole house was dusty. Well, she could fix that. Eleanor had learned to work hard in her uncle's house. She knew how to clean and cook and make do with little. She went back to the main room and found a broom in the corner. Then Eleanor Hayes, the mail-order bride from Boston, began to sweep. With each stroke of the broom, she swept away a little more of her old life. This was her home now. She would make it work. She had no other choice. Outside, the Montana wind blew across the endless prairie, wild and free and waiting. Eleanor woke to the sound of roosters crowing. She had never heard such a loud, harsh sound so close before. In Boston, she might hear them faintly from far away. Here they seemed to be right outside her window. She sat up in the narrow bed and looked around the small room. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality came crashing back. Montana, the ranch, her new life. She had been here for 2 weeks now. 2 long, difficult weeks of learning how different everything was from Boston. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now red and rough. Her back ached constantly. Her arms hurt from carrying water and wood. She had blisters on her feet from the ill-fitting boots Flint had given her. Her own thin shoes had fallen apart after 3 days. Eleanor got out of bed and dressed quickly. The mornings were cold even though Flint said it was spring. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and went to the main room. The stove had gone cold during the night. She had to relight it every morning, and she hated this task. The kindling never seemed to catch right. The smoke always blew back in her face. After several tries, she got a small fire going. She filled the coffee pot with water from the bucket and set it on the stove. Flint would arrive soon for breakfast. He came every morning at sunrise and every evening at sunset. The rest of the time, he worked on the ranch with his men. Eleanor rarely saw him during the day. She mixed flour and water to make biscuits. Her first attempts at cooking here had been disasters. The stove was nothing like the one in Boston. It was too hot or too cold. She burned things or left them raw. The high altitude made everything cook differently. Flint never complained, but she saw him chewing tough biscuits and swallowing burned beans without comment. It made her feel worse than if he had yelled at her. She was putting the biscuits in the oven when she heard boots on the porch. Flint came in without knocking. He never knocked. It was his house after all. "Morning," he said. "Good morning," Eleanor replied, keeping her eyes on the stove. Flint poured himself coffee and sat at the table. He always waited silently while she finished cooking. Eleanor served him biscuits, fried salt pork, and beans. He ate without talking. Eleanor sat across from him with her own small portion. She had learned to eat less than him. Food had to be bought or made, and both required effort and money she didn't have. Halfway through the meal, Flint looked up at her. "You need to learn to milk the cow." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "The cow? Can't buy milk at a store out here. We have a milk cow. Maria has been doing it, but she's got her own work. You need to learn." Maria was the wife of Flint's foreman, a Mexican man named Carlos. They lived in a small house near the bunkhouse with their 3 children. Maria had been kind to Eleanor, but they couldn't talk much. Maria spoke mostly Spanish, and Eleanor spoke only English. They communicated with gestures and smiles. "I've never milked a cow," Eleanor said quietly. "You'd never done a lot of things. You learned them." Flint stood up. "Come on. I'll show you now." Eleanor followed him outside. The sun was just coming up, turning the sky pink and orange. The air was cold and fresh. Flint walked to a small pen where a large brown cow stood chewing grass. The animal looked enormous to Eleanor. She had never been this close to a cow before. "Her name is Rosie," Flint said. He opened the pen and led the cow to a post. He tied her there with practiced ease. "She's gentle. Won't kick if you treat her right." He grabbed a bucket and a small stool. He sat beside the cow and pulled the bucket under her udder. "Watch," he said. Eleanor watched as his large, rough hands gripped the cow's teats and pulled in a steady rhythm. Milk squirted into the bucket with a ringing sound. The cow stood calmly, occasionally swishing her tail. Flint made it look easy. After a few minutes, he stood and handed Eleanor the stool. "Your turn." Eleanor sat down nervously. The cow seemed even bigger from this angle. She reached out and touched the udder. It was warm and soft. She gripped as Flint had done and pulled. Nothing happened. "Firmer," Flint said. "She's not made of glass." Eleanor tried again, gripping harder. A thin stream of milk came out. She smiled despite herself. "Good. Keep that rhythm." Both hands, one then the other. Eleanor worked, her hands clumsy at first. The cow shifted her feet and Eleanor froze. "She's fine," Flint said. "Keep going." Slowly, Eleanor found a rhythm. Milk began to fill the bucket. Her hands started to ache, but she kept going. When the bucket was half full, Flint told her to stop. "That's enough for today. You'll build up the strength." He took the bucket. "You'll do this every morning and evening from now on." Every morning and evening. 2 more tasks added to her growing list. Eleanor nodded and stood. Her hands were shaking from the effort. Over the next week, Eleanor added more skills to her survival. Flint taught her to feed the chickens without getting pecked. He showed her how to collect eggs without breaking them. He demonstrated how to chop wood, though she could barely lift the axe. He expected her to haul water from the creek twice a day, a job that left her gasping and sore. The hardest part was the loneliness. Eleanor saw Maria and her children sometimes, but they couldn't really talk. Flint's ranch hands were polite but distant. They tipped their hats when they saw her but never spoke. Flint himself was silent most of the time. He gave instructions and expected her to follow them. He never asked how she felt or if she was managing. He just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. At night, Eleanor lay in her small bed and listened to the wind. It never stopped blowing. Sometimes she heard coyotes howling in the distance. The sound was eerie and sad. Sometimes she cried quietly into her pillow. Sometimes she was too tired to cry. She just lay there, wondering how long she could survive this hard, lonely life. One morning, 3 weeks after her arrival, Eleanor was walking back from the creek with 2 heavy buckets of water. The path was rocky and uneven. She had made this walk so many times that her arms had developed new muscles, but she was tired, and she wasn't watching her feet carefully enough. Her boot caught on a rock. Eleanor stumbled forward. The buckets flew from her hands, spilling water everywhere. She fell hard on her knees and hands. Pain shot through her palms where rocks cut the skin. Her dress was soaked and muddy. Eleanor stayed on her hands and knees, breathing hard. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the buckets at something. She wanted to cry. Instead, she just knelt there in the mud, shaking with frustration and exhaustion. "You hurt?" Flint's voice came from behind her. Eleanor jumped. She hadn't heard him approach. She tried to stand, but her legs were shaking too much. Flint reached down and pulled her to her feet easily. He looked at her muddy dress and bleeding hands. "Come on," he said. He picked up the empty buckets and started toward the creek. Eleanor followed, confused. At the creek, he filled 1 bucket with water, then pulled a bandana from his pocket. He dipped it in the cold water and took Eleanor's hand. Carefully, he cleaned the dirt and blood from her palm. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such rough hands. Eleanor stood very still, not knowing what to say. Flint cleaned both her hands, then wrapped the bandana around the worst cut. "You're working too hard," he said, not looking at her face, trying to do everything at once. "That's how accidents happen." "I'm trying to be useful," Eleanor said. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I'm trying to earn my keep in this place." Flint finally looked at her. Something flickered in his dark eyes. "You think I brought you here to be a servant?" "I don't know why you brought me here. You never talked to me." The words hung in the air between them. Flint was quiet for a long moment. He picked up both buckets and filled them. Then he carried them himself, walking toward the house. Eleanor followed, her hands throbbing. At the house, Flint set down the buckets. He turned to face her. "I'm not good with words," he said slowly. "Never have been. Out here, people judge you by what you do, not what you say." "And what have I done?" Eleanor asked. "Besides fail at everything?" "You haven't failed. You're still here, still trying. That counts for something." He pulled his hat off and ran a hand through his hair. "This life is hard." "I know that. It's hard for men who were born to it. For a city woman." He shook his head. "I thought maybe I was wrong to bring you here. Thought maybe you'd break." "I'm not broken," Eleanor said. "No," Flint agreed. "You're not. You're stronger than you look." He put his hat back on. "Take the rest of the morning easy. Let those hands heal. Tomorrow I'm going to teach you something you might actually enjoy." "What's that?" "How to ride a horse." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Really?" "Can't live on a ranch and not ride. Besides, you need to see more than this house and that creek. There's beautiful country out there." He almost smiled. It was the first time Eleanor had seen anything like a smile on his face. "Might help you hate this place a little less." That afternoon, Eleanor sat on the porch and watched the ranch. She saw Flint and his men working with the cattle in the distance. She saw Maria hanging laundry while her children played nearby. She saw the endless grass bending in the wind and the mountains standing purple against the sky. The land was harsh, but it had a wild beauty that she was starting to notice. Maybe Flint was right. Maybe she was stronger than she looked. Maybe she hadn't come all this way just to give up. Boston was gone. That life was over. This was her life now, and she would learn to live it. The mare was smaller than Flint's horse, with a coat the color of copper in sunlight. She stood tied to the fence post, calm and still, as Eleanor approached with nervous steps. The morning air was cool, and the sun was just starting to warm the land. Flint stood beside the horse, holding a saddle. "This is Penny," he said. "She's the gentlest horse on the ranch. Raised her from a foal. She won't do anything to hurt you." Eleanor reached out and touched the horse's neck. The hair was soft and warm. Penny turned her head slightly and looked at Eleanor with one large, dark eye. Eleanor felt less afraid. The horse seemed kind somehow. Flint lifted the saddle onto Penny's back and began tightening straps. "Pay attention," he said. "You'll need to do this yourself eventually." Eleanor watched as he worked, trying to remember every step. There were so many straps and buckles. How would she ever remember them all? But she didn't say anything. She just watched and tried to learn. When the saddle was secure, Flint turned to her. Put your left foot in the stirrup. Grab the saddle horn with both hands. Then push up and swing your right leg over. Eleanor stared at the stirrup. It seemed very high up. She put her foot in it and grabbed the saddle horn. She tried to push up, but her arms weren't strong enough. She fell back down, embarrassed. Again, Flint said. Push harder. Eleanor tried again. This time, Flint put his hands on her waist and lifted, helping her up. She swung her leg over and suddenly she was sitting on the horse. The ground seemed very far away. The horse shifted her weight and Eleanor grabbed the saddle horn with both hands. Relax, Flint said. The horse can feel when you're scared. Makes her nervous too. Eleanor tried to relax, but her heart was beating fast. She had never been on a horse before. What if she fell? What if the horse ran away with her? Flint handed her the reins. Hold these, but don't pull hard. Gentle pressure to guide her. Left rein to go left, right rein to go right. Pull back gently to stop. He led Penny away from the fence, walking beside her. The horse moved slowly and carefully. Eleanor bounced slightly with each step. It felt strange and uncomfortable, but also exciting. She was riding a horse. A real horse. Flint walked them around the corral several times. Eleanor began to find the rhythm of the horse's walk. Her body learned to move with it instead of against it. After a while, Flint let go of the bridle. You're riding on your own now, he said. Eleanor's hands tightened on the reins, but Penny just kept walking steadily. Nothing bad happened. Eleanor started to smile. She was doing it. She was actually riding. They practiced for an hour. Flint taught her how to make Penny walk faster and slower. He showed her how to turn and stop. By the end, Eleanor was tired but happy. When she finally climbed down from the saddle, her legs felt shaky and strange. Your legs will be sore tomorrow, Flint said. Uses muscles you didn't know you had. But you did good. Eleanor couldn't stop smiling. Can we do it again tomorrow? Every day, Flint said. In a few weeks, you'll be ready to ride out on the range. Over the next month, Eleanor rode every morning. Her legs grew stronger. Her balance improved. She learned to trot and even to canter, though the faster speeds frightened her at first. But Flint was always there, calling out instructions, telling her when to lean forward or sit back. He never let her try something too difficult. He pushed her, but not too hard. One morning, Flint arrived with 2 horses already saddled. Today we ride out, he said. I want to show you the ranch. The real ranch. Eleanor climbed onto Penny with excitement. They rode out of the corral and onto the open prairie. The grass stretched away in every direction, rolling like waves on an ocean. The sky was huge and blue, with only a few white clouds. Eleanor felt like she could see forever. They rode for an hour, Flint leading the way. He showed her where the cattle grazed. He pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a line of cottonwood trees that marked where water ran underground. He explained how the ranch worked, where the boundaries were, which neighbors were friendly and which ones caused trouble. That's the Morrison place to the north, Flint said, pointing. Old man Morrison would steal the gold from his dead mother's teeth if he could. Watch him. Don't trust him. They stopped at a creek to let the horses drink. Eleanor dismounted and walked to the water. It was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. She cupped her hands and drank. The water tasted sweet and clean, better than anything from the well. This is our best water source, Flint said. Never runs dry even in drought. Some of the other ranchers are jealous. They've got springs that dry up every summer. This one doesn't. Is that bad? Eleanor asked. That they're jealous? Can be. Water's precious out here. Men have killed over water rights. He squatted down beside the creek. That's why I need you to know the land. Know where you are. Know how to get home if something happens. Eleanor felt a chill despite the warm sun. What could happen? Flint looked at her seriously. Lots of things. This is wild country, Eleanor. There are dangers. Animals, weather, bad men. I'm not trying to scare you. Just want you prepared. They rode back slowly. Eleanor thought about what Flint had said. She had been so focused on learning daily tasks that she hadn't thought about real danger. But of course there was danger. This wasn't safe, civilized Boston. This was the frontier. People died out here. She had heard stories. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what Flint had said about bad men and water rights. She thought about Morrison, the neighbor who couldn't be trusted. Finally, she got out of bed and went to the main room. Through the window, she could see the bunkhouse where Flint slept with his men. A single lamp burned inside. The next few weeks passed peacefully. Eleanor continued to improve at all her tasks. She could milk Rosie quickly now. She could gather eggs without breaking any. She could start the stove on the first try most mornings. Her hands were covered in calluses and her skin was turning brown from the sun. Her dresses were getting loose because the hard work made her leaner and stronger. Then one night everything changed. Eleanor woke to the sound of gunshots. She sat up in bed, her heart racing. Outside, men were shouting. Cattle were making frightened sounds. More gunshots cracked through the night. Eleanor jumped out of bed and ran to the window, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. She heard running footsteps, then Flint's voice yelling orders. More gunshots. Eleanor stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Should she stay inside? Should she go out? What was happening? Then she remembered. Flint kept a rifle by the front door. She had seen it every day but never touched it. Eleanor ran to the main room and grabbed the rifle. It was heavy and cold. She had never held a gun before. She didn't even know if it was loaded. Eleanor opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. In the moonlight, she could see dark shapes moving near the cattle pens. Men on horses driving cattle away. Rustlers. They were stealing Flint's cattle. She saw Flint and his men near the barn, shooting at the thieves. The rustlers were shooting back. Eleanor raised the rifle, her hands shaking. She didn't know how to aim it. She didn't know if she could hit anything. But she pulled the trigger anyway. The gun kicked hard against her shoulder, knocking her back. The sound was deafening. She pulled the trigger again and again, shooting into the air above the rustlers' heads. She wasn't trying to kill anyone. She just wanted to scare them. To show them that someone else was shooting at them. The rustlers shouted and wheeled their horses around. They galloped away into the darkness, leaving the cattle behind. Flint and his men kept shooting until the rustlers were out of range. Then silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the frightened sounds of the cattle. Eleanor stood on the porch, still holding the rifle. Her whole body was shaking. Her shoulder hurt where the gun had kicked. She had never been so scared in her life. Flint came running toward the house. "Eleanor, are you hurt?" "No," she managed to say. "I'm fine." He climbed the porch steps and took the rifle from her hands. He looked at her face in the moonlight. "You were shooting. I heard the gunshots. I heard the men. I thought I should help." Flint stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something completely unexpected. He laughed. Not a small laugh, but a real deep laugh that shook his shoulders. Eleanor had never heard him laugh before. "You thought you should help," he repeated. "City woman picks up a rifle she's never fired before and starts shooting at cattle rustlers." He shook his head, still smiling. "Eleanor, you could have gotten yourself killed." "So could you," she said. The smile faded from his face. He looked at her differently now, as if seeing something he hadn't seen before. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I could have." Carlos came running up. "Boss, they got away clean. Didn't get any of the cattle, though. They ran off when the shooting got heavy." "Thanks to Eleanor," Flint said. "She came out shooting. Probably scared them more than we did." Carlos looked at Eleanor with surprise and new respect. He said something in Spanish and smiled. Eleanor didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was approval. After Carlos left, Flint sat down on the porch steps. Eleanor sat beside him. The adrenaline was leaving her body, replaced by exhaustion. Her hands had stopped shaking, but now she felt like she might cry. "I've never been that scared," she whispered. "Being scared is normal," Flint said. "Acting anyway, that's courage." After the night of the rustlers, things changed between Eleanor and Flint. He no longer ate his meals in silence. He started telling her about his day, about problems with the cattle, about weather coming in. Eleanor told him about her struggles with the garden she was trying to grow, about the chickens that refused to lay eggs in their nests, about the bread that kept turning out wrong in the temperamental oven. They were talking like partners now. Like friends. Maybe even like a real married couple. Flint started teaching Eleanor to shoot properly. Every evening after supper, they would go out behind the barn and practice with the rifle. He showed her how to hold it correctly, how to aim, how to breathe before pulling the trigger. Eleanor's shoulder was bruised from the kickback, but she kept practicing. She wanted to be able to protect herself and the ranch if needed. One afternoon, 2 months after her arrival, Flint came to the house earlier than usual. "Saddle up, Penny," he said. "I want to show you something." Eleanor was learning to saddle the mare by herself now. It still took her longer than it took Flint, but she could do it without help. They rode out together, heading west toward the mountains. The day was beautiful, with warm sun and a gentle breeze. Wildflowers were blooming in the grass, splashes of yellow and purple and white. They rode for over an hour, farther than Eleanor had gone before. Finally, Flint led them up a rocky hill. At the top, he stopped and dismounted. Eleanor did the same. When she looked around, her breath caught in her throat. The view was incredible. She could see for miles in every direction. The prairie stretched away like a golden green sea. The mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow even though it was summer now. A hawk circled high above, riding the wind. The sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Flint said quietly. "Came here a lot when I first bought this land. Help me think." Eleanor turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It's beautiful." "Yeah." Flint stood beside her, looking out over the land. "Wanted you to see it. Wanted you to see why I love this place. Why I stay here even when it's hard." Eleanor understood. In this moment, looking at this wild, endless beauty, she understood why someone would choose this difficult life. There was something about the land that got into your soul, something about the freedom and the space and the challenge of it. "Race you back to that stand of trees," Flint said suddenly, pointing to a cluster of cottonwoods about half a mile away. "What?" Eleanor laughed. "I can't race. I barely know how to canter." "Then you better learn fast." Flint swung up onto his horse. "I'll give you a head start. Go!" Eleanor scrambled onto Penny and kicked her into a trot, then a canter. Behind her, she heard Flint laugh and yell, "Faster than that, city girl." Eleanor leaned forward and urged Penny to go faster. The mare responded, moving into a gallop. Wind rushed past Eleanor's face. Her hair came loose from its pins and streamed behind her. She gripped the saddle with her knees the way Flint had taught her and let the horse run. She had never moved so fast in her life. It was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. The ground rushed beneath them. The wind stole her breath, and suddenly Eleanor wasn't scared anymore. She was laughing. She opened her mouth and screamed with pure joy and exhilaration. Behind her, Flint caught up easily on his bigger, faster horse. He pulled alongside her, and she could hear him laughing too. "That's it," he shouted. "The louder you scream, the wilder I'll ride." They raced across the prairie together, two horses galloping side by side. Eleanor screamed again, a sound of freedom and wildness that the old Boston Eleanor would never have made. This new Eleanor was different. This Eleanor could ride like the wind and scream with joy and not care who heard her. At the trees, they slowed to a stop. Both horses were breathing hard. Eleanor was breathing hard too, her heart pounding with excitement. Flint looked at her, and his eyes were bright with something she hadn't seen before, something warm and alive. "You're a natural," he said. "Knew you would be once you stopped being scared." "I'm not scared anymore," Eleanor said. And it was true. She wasn't scared of the horses or the land or the hard work. She wasn't even scared of Flint anymore. She was just alive and free in a way she had never been in Boston. They rode back to the ranch slowly, letting the horses cool down. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky orange and pink. Eleanor felt happier than she had in months, maybe happier than she had ever been. That night, Flint didn't go to the bunkhouse after supper. He sat on the porch and Eleanor joined him. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. There were so many stars here, more than Eleanor had ever seen in the city. They filled the sky like diamonds scattered on dark cloth. "Eleanor," Flint said after a while. His voice was quiet and uncertain. "I've been thinking about us. About this arrangement." Eleanor's heart started beating faster. "What about it?" "It's been 3 months. You've proven you can handle this life. You're strong and brave and you work hard. You're—" He paused, struggling for words. "You're more than I hoped for when I sent for a mail-order bride." Eleanor waited, not sure what to say. "What I'm trying to say is, I don't want this to just be an arrangement anymore. I want—" He turned to look at her. "I want a real marriage, if you want that too." Eleanor looked at his face in the starlight, this rough, silent cowboy who had given her time and space, who had taught her to ride and shoot, who had looked at her with pride when she faced the rustlers, who made her laugh when they raced across the prairie. "I want that too," she said softly. Flint reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. I'm not good with fancy words or romantic gestures. I can't give you the life you had in Boston. I don't want the life I had in Boston, Eleanor said. I want this life. With you. Flint smiled, a real smile that made his whole face look different. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It was Eleanor's first kiss, and it was nothing like she had imagined. It wasn't soft and gentle like the romance novels described. It was real and rough and tasted like coffee, and it was perfect. That night, Eleanor didn't sleep in the small bedroom alone. She went with Flint to his room, and they became husband and wife in truth, not just in name. Eleanor was nervous at first, but Flint was patient and gentle, and when she woke the next morning in his arms, she felt like she finally belonged somewhere, like she had found her home. The next week, Flint took Eleanor to town. It was her first visit since she had arrived. The town was small and dusty, with only a few buildings along a single main street. People stared at Eleanor as they walked to the general store. She heard whispers. She saw women looking at her with unfriendly eyes. Inside the store, Flint introduced her to the owner, Mr. Peterson. He was polite but cold. While Flint was looking at tools, Eleanor overheard two women talking near the fabric display. That's Cordell's mail-order bride, one whispered. Can you imagine? Selling yourself to a stranger like that. No better than a prostitute if you ask me, the other replied. Coming out here to trap a lonely man. Eleanor felt her face burn. She wanted to hide. She wanted to run back to the ranch where no one judged her. But then she remembered the night of the rustlers. She remembered racing across the prairie. She remembered that she wasn't the weak Boston girl anymore. She walked over to the two women. They looked at her with surprise and barely concealed disgust. Eleanor stood straight and looked them in the eye. I'm Eleanor Cordell, she said clearly, and yes, I came here as a mail-order bride. My husband sent for me because he needed help on his ranch. I came because I needed a home. There's no shame in that. We made an honest arrangement and we work hard together. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should say it to my face instead of whispering behind my back. The two women's faces turned red. They glanced at each other, then hurried away without a word. Eleanor's hands were shaking, but she felt good, strong. She had stood up for herself. When they left the store, Flint was smiling. Heard what you said to those women. I'm tired of being judged, Eleanor said. I'm tired of people thinking I'm less than them because of how I got here. You're not less than anyone. Flint put his arm around her shoulders, right there in the middle of the street where everyone could see. You're my wife, and I'm proud of that. Eleanor looked up at him. You are? Hell yes. You're brave and strong, and you don't take anyone's nonsense. Those women could learn something from you. He kissed the top of her head. Let them whisper. We know the truth. On the ride back to the ranch, Eleanor felt different. She had faced the judgment of others and survived. She had claimed her place as Flint's wife in front of the whole town. She belonged to this land now, and this land belonged to her. She was no longer a mail-order bride. She was a rancher's wife. She was Eleanor Cordell. That evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Flint reached for her hand. You happy here? He asked. Eleanor thought about it. She thought about the hard work and the loneliness she had felt at first. She thought about her blistered hands and aching back. She thought about the dusty little house that was nothing like her father's home in Boston. But she also thought about riding Penny across the open prairie. She thought about the way the mountains looked at sunrise. The first snow came in October, earlier than Flint had expected. Eleanor woke one morning to find the world transformed. Everything was covered in white, silent, and beautiful. She stood at the window and watched the snow falling, remembering winter in Boston. But this was different. This snow was wild and free, not contained by city streets and buildings. Flint came in from outside, his hat and shoulders covered in snow. Big storm coming, he said. Can feel it in the air. We need to prepare. For the next few days, they worked hard to get ready. They moved the cattle closer to the ranch buildings. They stocked extra hay in the barn. They brought in more firewood than Eleanor thought they could ever use. Flint checked and rechecked everything, his face serious and worried. Winter out here can kill you if you're not careful, he explained. We could get snowed in for weeks. Need to make sure we have everything we need. The big storm hit 3 days later. The wind howled around the house like a living thing. Snow fell so thick that Eleanor couldn't see the barn, only 50 feet away. The cold was fierce, seeping through every crack in the walls. Eleanor and Flint stayed close to the stove, feeding it constantly to keep the house warm. The storm lasted 2 days. When it finally ended, snow was piled 4 feet high in some places. Flint and his men spent days digging out paths and checking on the cattle. Several animals had died in the cold. Flint was quiet and angry about the loss. Each animal represented money and food for the winter, but there were good things too. With the snow keeping them inside more, Eleanor and Flint spent more time together. She taught him to play card games she had learned in Boston. He told her stories about growing up in Texas, about coming to Montana to start his own ranch. They talked and laughed and grew closer with each passing day. In November, Eleanor realized something was different. She had missed her monthly courses. Her breasts were tender. Some mornings she felt sick to her stomach. She knew what it meant, but she was afraid to believe it. Afraid to hope. After another week of the same symptoms, she told Flint. They were sitting by the fire after supper and she just said it quietly. "I think I'm going to have a baby." Flint looked at her with wide eyes. "You sure?" "Pretty sure. All the signs are there." Flint's face broke into the biggest smile Eleanor had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "A baby," he said. "We're going to have a baby." Eleanor held him back, feeling happiness and fear mixed together. The nearest doctor is 50 miles away. If something goes wrong in the winter, nothing will go wrong, Flint said firmly, but Eleanor saw the worry in his eyes too. They both knew women died in childbirth, especially out here where doctors were far away and help was hard to find. Maria was the first person they told. The older woman cried with joy and hugged Eleanor tight. She spoke rapid Spanish, and Eleanor understood from her tone that Maria was promising to help. Maria had given birth to 3 healthy children. She knew what to do. The winter deepened. December brought more snow and bitter cold. Eleanor grew rounder as the baby inside her grew. She couldn't do as much work anymore. Simple tasks left her breathless and tired. Flint wouldn't let her carry heavy things or go out in the cold. He treated her like she was made of glass, which sometimes made her laugh and sometimes made her irritated. Christmas came quietly. Eleanor made cookies with the last of their sugar. Flint surprised her with a gift he had carved, a beautiful cradle made of smooth wood. He had been working on it secretly in the barn for weeks. Eleanor cried when she saw it, running her hands over the careful craftsmanship. "It's perfect," she whispered. "For our perfect baby," Flint said, putting his hand on her swelling belly. "Boy or girl doesn't matter. Just want them healthy. Want you healthy." In January, when the snow was deepest and the cold was worst, Eleanor started having pains. They came and went for 2 days. Flint wanted to take her to town to find the doctor, but the snow was too deep. The roads were impassable. They were trapped at the ranch. The pains got worse. Maria came and took charge. She sent Flint and the other men out of the house. This was women's work. She boiled water and gathered clean cloths. She spoke to Eleanor in Spanish and broken English, telling her what to do, when to push, when to rest. The labor went on for hours. Eleanor had never felt pain like this. It consumed her entire body and mind. She screamed and cried and begged for it to stop. Outside, Flint paced back and forth in the snow, feeling more helpless than he had ever felt in his life. He could fight rustlers and survive storms, but he couldn't help Eleanor through this. Night fell. The labor continued. Maria looked worried, but kept encouraging Eleanor. "Fuerte," she said. "Strong. You strong." Just before dawn, when Eleanor thought she couldn't take any more, the baby finally came. One last push and then a cry filled the room. A strong, healthy cry. Eleanor fell back on the pillows, exhausted beyond belief. "Niña," Maria said, smiling. "Baby girl. Beautiful baby girl." Maria cleaned the baby and wrapped her in soft blankets. Then she placed the tiny bundle in Eleanor's arms. Eleanor looked down at her daughter and felt love like she had never imagined. The baby had dark hair like Flint and tiny perfect features. Her eyes were squeezed shut and her little fists waved in the air. "She's perfect," Eleanor whispered. Maria opened the door and called for Flint. He came in slowly, his face pale with worry. When he saw Eleanor holding the baby, relief flooded his features. He knelt beside the bed and looked at his daughter with wonder. "She's so small," he said softly. "All babies are small," Eleanor said with a tired laugh. "But she's strong. Listen to those cries." Flint touched the baby's tiny hand and her fingers wrapped around his rough, calloused finger. He made a sound that was almost a sob. "She's ours," he said. "Really ours. What should we name her?" Eleanor asked. They had talked about names before, but nothing had felt right. Now looking at their daughter, Flint said, "Grace, let's call her Grace because she's a gift we don't deserve." "Grace Cordell." Eleanor said, "It's perfect. The next weeks were hard." Eleanor was exhausted and sore. Grace needed to be fed every few hours, day and night. Eleanor barely slept. Flint helped as much as he could, changing Grace's cloths and rocking her when she cried. Maria came every day to help and to check on them both. But despite the exhaustion, Eleanor had never been happier. She would sit in the rocking chair Flint had moved into their bedroom and hold Grace while the baby nursed. She would look at her daughter's perfect face and feel complete in a way she never had before. This tiny person was half her and half Flint. She was their future, their hope. Slowly, the winter began to release its grip. February brought warmer days. The snow started to melt. By March, the first signs of spring appeared. Green shoots pushed up through the mud. The cattle grew more active. Birds returned from wherever they had gone. One warm April morning, Eleanor bundled Grace in blankets and took her outside for the first time. The baby blinked in the bright sunlight, her dark eyes trying to focus on the big world around her. Eleanor walked to the porch where Flint sat mending a bridle. "Look," Eleanor said. "Grace is seeing the ranch for the first time." Flint set down his work and took his daughter gently. He stood and walked to the edge of the porch, pointing. "See that little one? That's your home. All this land, as far as you can see. One day some of it will be yours." Eleanor stood beside him, her arm around his waist. She looked out at the land that had seemed so harsh and frightening when she first arrived. The mountains in the distance. The rolling prairie. The sky that went on forever. It didn't frighten her anymore. It was home. She thought about the frightened girl who had stepped off that stagecoach almost a year ago. That girl had been desperate and alone with no idea what her future held. She had been soft and weak, unable to do basic ranch tasks. She had cried herself to sleep in a small room, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. That girl was gone now. In her place stood Eleanor Cordell, ranch wife and mother. Her hands were rough and strong. Her face was tanned from the sun. She could ride a horse, shoot a rifle, milk a cow, and deliver a calf. She could stand up to gossips in town and rustlers in the night. She had survived a Montana winter and given birth without a doctor. She was strong in ways she had never imagined she could be. "What are you thinking?" Flint asked, looking at her face. "I'm thinking about how different I am now. How different everything is. You miss Boston? Your old life?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, that life was small and safe and boring. This life is hard, but it's real. It's mine. I chose it, and it chose me back." Flint smiled. "You know what I remember? That first day when I asked if you could cook and you looked so scared I thought you might faint." Eleanor laughed. "I was terrified of you. You seemed so rough and hard. I was rough and hard. Still am, I guess. But you softened me some. And you toughened me some." Eleanor touched Grace's soft cheek. "We're good for each other." "The best," Flint agreed. He kissed Eleanor's forehead, then Grace's. "My two girls. Everything I need right here." That afternoon, Eleanor saddled Penny for the first time since Grace was born. Flint was worried about her riding so soon, but Eleanor insisted. She needed to feel the wind in her hair again. She needed to remember who she had become. They rode out together, Flint carrying Grace in a sling that Maria had made.